This is Yukio Mishima, the man who seemed to have it all. A popular writer, playwright, and actor, often regarded as one of the most influential Japanese figures from post-war Japan. Yet, on a cold November day in 1970, Mishima, along with his accomplices, would stage a military coup and take his own life, shocking the entire world. This is the tragic story of Yukio Mishima, the writing prodigy who left the world as a failed rebel. Born in Tokyo City, Mishima was the son of Asuza Hiraoka and Shizue. His father was a government official and his mother was the daughter of the 5th principal of the Kaisei Academy. He lived with his grandmother, Natsuko, who was the granddaughter of Matsudaira Yoritaka, who served as the daimyo, or feudal lord, of Shishido-han during the late Edo period. Since her health was in poor condition, Mishima was tasked with taking care of her. Due to this, he faced a restriction that confined him to his home, isolating him from the outside world for several years. He was not allowed to play sports or even interact with other boys. The only time when he interacted was when he played with his female cousins and their dolls. This profoundly affected his social life and the way that he viewed the world. In his novel, Mishima speculated that his grandmother's bitterness towards him might have been due to contracting syphilis from her husband. However, Mishima did eventually return to live with his family when he was 12 years old. Seeing his weak and effeminate son, Asuza was not pleased. He was a strict disciplinarian who wanted to toughen Mishima up and had distinctive ideas about how to raise a son. To correct his behavior, Asuza would do things like holding the boy up to a speeding train, or destroying any manuscripts or writings that Mishima tried to do, seeing them as unmanly. He wanted his son to be a strong and masculine man. Once, he spotted Mishima holding a cat and playing with it on his lap, so he took the cat and threw it away, only for Mishima to bring another cat and play with it again. Despite several warnings, Mishima persisted in playing with the cat, so his father eventually poisoned the cat that he had taken in. Somehow, the cat defied expectations by not only surviving, but also exhibiting increased energy. However, this did not stop Mishima from completing his studies at the prestigious Gakushuin High School. He also got the opportunity of meeting with the Emperor of Japan, Hirohito, who presented him with a silver watch for being the top student in his class. But little did he know that soon his life would take a dramatic turn. During this time, Japan was actively losing its forces on multiple fronts, and young people of fighting age were starting to get drafted into the Japanese army. Mishima was one of them. Unlike others, Mishima was delighted to be a part of the Japanese army, which he had always dreamt of. Just a few days before his medical checkup, Mishima wrote a farewell message to his family, ending it with the phrase, "Long live the Emperor." His family was shocked and worried that their son would never return, as Mishima's mother has heard a lot about how he dreamt of becoming a kamikaze pilot. However, he barely passed the medical exam and was put under the second-class conscript. But as if luck was by his side, he would later be declared unfit after a doctor misdiagnosed him with tuberculosis. When the war finally ended with Japan's surrender, Mishima was devastated by his country's loss. He vowed to preserve Japanese cultural traditions and rebuild the country's culture. As he wrote in his diary, quote, "Only by preserving Japanese irrationality will we be able to contribute to a world culture 100 years from now." End quote. After the war ended, Asuza allowed his son to become a novelist, though he had hoped his son would become a government bureaucrat like himself. However, he wanted Mishima to join the University of Tokyo and enroll in the Faculty of Law instead of Literature Department. Mishima agreed to his terms and ended up graduating and taking a job in the Ministry of the Treasury. But he soon resigned from his office life after convincing his father to let him pursue writing full-time. After leaving his government job, Mishima was finally able to focus all of his energy on writing. He started with his first novel, Thieves, in 1948. The following year, he would publish his semi-autobiographical work, Confessions of a Mask, which made him one of the most acclaimed and celebrated authors in Japan and around the world. Later, he published a travelogue, The Cup of Apollo, chronicling his world tour, including a trip to Greece that would inspire his 1954 novel, The Sound of Waves. As Mishima's political beliefs became increasingly radical, he began to produce numerous books imbued with pronounced political themes and undertones. Works like After the Banquet in 1960 and The Frolic of the Beasts were some of his best-known political-themed books. He also wrote some of his most experimental fiction during this period, including the science fiction Beautiful Star in 1962. The major shift in Mishima's writings reflected the changes happening in Japan after the Second World War. After the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan finally surrendered to the Allies-led United States. And with that, the Japanese archipelago was under the occupation of Colonel Douglas MacArthur, who purged many influential figures from their positions, and the emperor was forced to renounce his divinity. Along with that, the media and publishing industry also faced heavy censorship, and anything related to Japanese nationalism was frowned upon. Mishima just couldn't believe what was happening with his country, as many of his literary peers, people he had been close with before the war, ended up getting branded as war criminals. To escape from the public ostracization, many renounced their old views and converted to left-wing politics. Mishima was devastated, calling them opportunists, as some famous authors went on to join the Communist Party. Mishima couldn't accept this dramatic shift and decided to take matters into his own hands. He knew that he had no support or could do anything daring with his frail body, so he decided to reclaim a sense of strength and discipline for himself. He started by doing weight training, keeping up an intense workout regimen of 3 sessions per week for the rest of his life. He even wrote an essay called Sun and Steel, where he criticized the intellectuals for prioritizing the mind over the physical body. He even threw himself into martial arts, becoming highly skilled in disciplines like Kendo, Batojutsu, and Karate. At one point, he even got interested in UFOs, joining a flying saucer research group. But his real passion was to restore the power of the emperor that he saw as being neutered by the US-imposed constitution. Throughout the 1960s, Mishima's ultra-nationalist views kept growing and growing to more extreme levels. Just a few months before his death, he would explain why he took this drastic path, stating, quote, "The more I get back to the Japanese tradition, the more I was able to achieve a positive character. It is my firm belief that our Japanese character was stunted by westernization. We have learned about mental disease and shame from the West. Thus, my shift to positive character is an effective and Japanizing process." End quote. By 1967, Mishima became a key figure in a plan to create a 10,000-strong Japan National Guard, a civilian complement to the country's self-defense forces. He started leading the right-wing college students through basic military training to train 100 officers to lead the National Guard. But when Mishima's big plan for a large-scale National Guard failed to gain much traction, he decided to start his private militia group instead. He formed the Tatenokai, or Shield Society, which was mostly made up of right-wing college students who swore to protect the emperor. He advocated for overturning the political changes forced on Japan, and took desperate steps to revive the traditional order that he had felt had been lost. This path would inevitably steer him towards a grim and tragic destiny. The day was November 25th, 1970. Mishima, along with his Tatenokai militia members, showed up at the headquarters of the Japan Self-Defense Forces in Tokyo. They entered the headquarters and tied up the commanding officer, preparing for their speech. Mishima wore the traditional wide hashimaki headband with a red Hinomaru circle, with the kanji characters meaning to be reborn 7 times to serve the country. It was a reference to the last words of Kusunoki Masasue, who died fighting to defend the emperor in the 14th century. He stepped out onto the balcony and addressed the soldiers gathered below to inspire a coup that would help restore the power of the emperor. But things didn't exactly go as planned. Instead of supporting the coup, the soldiers became irritated and started shouting back at him. As the forces started to get annoyed, Mishima had no other choice but to rant about how the self-defense forces became too passive and had forgotten the spirit of the samurai. But nothing seemed to work, as the soldiers heckled more and more, asking him to get out of there. After giving his speech calling for the restoration of the Emperor's power, Mishima cried out "Long live the Emperor" 3 times before returning to the Commandant's office. He apologized to the Commandant for his rude behavior, saying, quote, "We did it to return the Japan Self-Defense Forces to the Emperor. I had no choice but to do this." End quote. He ordered Morita to act as kaishakunin to end his life as Mishima stabbed himself in the abdomen, committing seppuku, a ritual suicide which is commonly practiced by the samurais. However, Morita failed to cut off his head quickly even after 3 failed attempts. So, Hiroyasu Koga stepped in and finally ended his suffering. It would be later revealed that Mishima had carefully planned his suicide over about a year. Before his death, he made sure that all of his accomplices were safe and had enough money to cover the legal expenses for carrying out seppuku. The day after his death, Mishima's body was returned to his family. His father Asuza was not ready to accept his son's body, fearing a changed appearance, but was relieved to find Mishima's head and body neatly stitched up. For his final goodbye, he was dressed in the Tatenokai uniform with his sword placed on his chest as he had wished. Interestingly, Mishima chose the date of November 25th for his final act, as this was the same day that the Emperor Showa had become regent and issued the Humanity Declaration. His remains were buried in the Hiroaka family grave, and coincidentally, the day of his death was the day when he began working on Confessions of a Mask. He wrote down in notes for this work, quote, "This book is a will, for I leave in the realm of death where I used to live. If you take a movie of a suicide jump and rotate the film in reverse, the suicide person jumps up from the valley bottom to the top of a cliff at a furious speed, and he revives." End quote. Right before his death, Mishima mailed his final book, being his big tetralogy, The Sea of Fertility. The book contained 4 novels that spanned from the period of change in Japan to the capitalist and consumer-driven society. Compared to his other works, the book stood out the most due to its dense and philosophical nature, making it special. Even though he was not able to succeed in bringing about the revolution he had expected, his wife recalled Mishima saying, quote, "Even if I am not immediately understood, it's okay, because I'll be understood by the Japan of 50 or 100 years' time." End quote. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any more videos like this.